All right, Chapter 9, Video 1. We are starting a new time period called the New Republic, which is 1800 to 1820, and it's beginning with Thomas Jefferson. We had talked about the election of 1800 being the Revolution of 1800, that we have a new political theory coming into the White House through Thomas Jefferson, and so that's the beginning of the New Republic. So I want to talk a little bit about what we looked like at that time period. Our population has crossed over the Appalachian Mountains in fairly significant numbers to about 2 million. Now in 1800, the Mississippi River was still our western border, so we're filling into that area such that by 1840, more than 40% of our population lived west of the Appalachian Mountains in about 8 new states. And we're becoming more complicated and more sophisticated. We see more commercial farming, greater variety of professions. You see folks who are involved in retail and publishing and early manufacturing, banking, transportation, and so forth. So Thomas Jefferson comes into office in March of 1801, gives a very simple speech, a very simple beginning. Now, he will be the first president inaugurated in what now is called Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. was not a well-developed area at the time. You had an executive mansion. It wasn't called a White House yet. You also had Capitol Hill, a racetrack, a theater, and apparently a lot of mud. So he's going to start off with very simple beginnings. He thought that Washington and Adams, the Federalist presidents, had engaged in a little too much pageantry, and he wanted to bring it down to more simple tones. Now, at the end of John Adams' presidency, we mentioned that he does a lot of late-term appointments, and that he appointed John Marshall to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. We will start to see his effect on the Supreme Court with the court case of Marbury versus Madison. This involves a guy named Marbury who had been a late-term appointment by Adams to be Justice of the Peace in Washington, D.C. He knew he was supposed to get the job, but not everything in the process had been carried out. So in comes Thomas Jefferson as president. His Secretary of State was James Madison, and James Madison finds this appointment of Marbury, but realizes that not everything had been completed with it. So it's going to get thrown out. Marbury then sues for his job. It goes to the Supreme Court, and John Marshall and a majority of the Supreme Court members will rule that part of a Judiciary Act was unconstitutional. This is the first time the Supreme Court ruled a federal law unconstitutional. Now, this is the power of judicial review, the ability of the judicial branch to review laws passed by Congress. It is a power that is implied in the Constitution, but not specifically directly stated in the Constitution. So when this decision came out, at first people wondered if that could be done, but they're going to realize that it's an important part of the checks and balances system for the judicial branch to be able to review the legislative branch, and so it was carried forth. Now, when we became independent from Great Britain, the Louisiana Territory had gone to the Spanish. Now it has come back to the French. And Jefferson is going to want to make a deal with the French so that we could use the Mississippi River. If you remember, when Spain controlled the Mississippi River, they said that we couldn't use it. So what Jefferson has in mind is that we would buy the port of New Orleans. That way, we would share the Mississippi River and the port with the French. The French would have to let us use the river so that we would let them use the port, and vice versa. So he is going to send Robert Livingston and James Monroe over to France to see if we could buy the port of New Orleans. When we get there, however, France is going to offer us the entire Louisiana Territory. Apparently France had grown very tired of this hemisphere. It was costing them a great deal of money, and they were willing to sell it to us at a very reasonable rate. So we buy it. Jefferson is going to wonder a little bit if he's able to do that. It's not in the Constitution that the president can buy territory, but he's going to quickly do so, realizing the deal that it is. It will double the size of the United States. So as a result of the Louisiana Purchase, Our western boundary is no longer the Mississippi River, but in this time period it will be the Rocky Mountains. So Jefferson, being an inquisitive person, really wanted to know, what did we just buy? And so he gets Congress to finance what we call the Lewis and Clark Expedition. At the time, though, it was called the Corps of Discovery. 50 men are going to set out from St. Louis and follow a path. There's a map on your PowerPoint, and follow a course up through the Northwest over out to the Pacific Ocean. They're going to learn about plants, animals, Native Americans in the area, and give us a taste for what we have just purchased. It will also give us claim to Oregon. Now, you're familiar probably a little bit with the Lewis and Clark expedition through Sacagawea, or however it is that we're supposed to pronounce her name. And she will be a guide for Lewis and Clark, although Lewis and Clark had hired her husband to do the job. Turns out he didn't know what he was doing, but she did. The whole Lewis and Clark expedition, or the Corps of Discovery, lasted about 2.5 years. But it's going to give us valuable information about what we have in that territory.